episode number 65 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast.
Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. For some people, having a baby is easy. But for others, like Robyn Birkin, it's a long and tough roller coaster. Her journey starts off like many. She thought that having a baby would take no time at all. A year later, she found herself at a fertility clinic, and several ovulation inductions, IUIs, IVF cycles, OHSS, and a miscarriage later, finally conceived. Now she is passionate about helping people not only survive the process, but thrive. Her superpower? Helping type A women find calm, confidence, and happiness in their fertility journeys and feel like warriors. In the Fertility Warriors podcast, she interviews other fertility warriors and shares advice and tips on how to conceive, how to navigate the world of fertility treatments, and how to be your best and healthiest self. Robyn Birkin is the author of Screw Infertility and is the core educator of the Fertility Warrior Intensive course. So welcome to the podcast, Robyn.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad that we have finally been able to chat.
Me too. So I've known you through the group on Facebook and have seen you and had followed you and find your story to be really, really inspiring, which is why I've really wanted you to come on. And you've birthed a movement, literally, of fertility warriors by first becoming one. It would be great if you could share your story with the listeners.
Absolutely. So my journey started in 2012 when my husband and I started trying to conceive, and it's just such a cliche because it was this whole concept of tick the boxes, get everything done like that you're supposed to get done, go on the trip around the world, buy the house, do all of those kind of things. And that's what we did. And we just got back. We spent Christmas in Paris and New Year's Eve in New York in 2011, 2012. Yeah, it was awesome. And I was like, do you know what? Here we are. I've ticked the boxes. Let's do this. And being super type A myself and like one of those organized ladies, I thought, all right, so I need to check all the boxes and make sure I'm in optimal health first. I went to see my GP, then I went to see a naturopath, and I did this 3-month conception plan. And I was convinced, I was so convinced, not even just that we would conceive the first month of trying, but she had this little time before we were supposed to start trying. I was so convinced that I would be so fertile that we would just accidentally fall pregnant during her little trial period. Right. I'm sure everybody listening will know that is completely not what happened in our story. And the first month, when we were, properly trying that it didn't happen, I just felt a bit kind of taken aback. That was unexpected. Then the next month, it was kind of a bit more of a shock. And then the next month, it was just starting to feel really unusual to me and not right. And by the 6 months of trying to conceive, I was actually feeling really quite frantic and quite depressed about everything that was going on because I planned this out. I had the checklist of the things that I was supposed to do to fall pregnant. I was doing my basal body temperatures. I'd gone to see the naturopath. Here I was now 6 months into my journey. I was eating all the whole foods. I was doing all what I thought were the right things. And every month I was now starting to feel lower and lower and lower on my journey. And nobody at work knew. My parents didn't know. My friends didn't know. So it was this real secret struggle between my husband and I. And husbands are a different breed. Some of them are real sensitive, chatty types. Mine is a bricklayer tradesman, speaks in grunts and swear words. And so I was here feeling desperately lonely and not really coping that well on my journey, but completely ignoring my mental health because it didn't feel like a priority at the time. Fast forward to a year, and we still weren't pregnant, and we landed at a fertility clinic. A bunch of tests that didn't really reveal anything later, and things like ovulation inductions, IUIs, still not pregnant. A year later, we then embarked on our first IVF cycle, which worked. Except that I had hyperstimulation and I had about 7 kilograms. So I think that's like 14 pounds of fluid in my abdomen. And I weigh, I don't know like how much I weigh in pounds, but I weigh about 60 kilograms here in Australia. I didn't even weigh that at the time. So I was like maybe 110, 120 pounds. And I had all of this fluid in my abdomen. I felt like absolute death. I could barely walk without crouching over because my tummy was so stretched, but I was pregnant. So I was like, I can get through this. Like, it's all been worth it. I've done the IVF, I've done the hard yards. It's been really shit. And we only, I think, I only told my friends and family and things like that, I think when we were starting to undergo IVF, because that's when it was starting to get really serious. And no, in fact, they knew about that because they were all messaging me, asking me if I was pregnant, which was failure number one, is that I was a bit too open with my story after we went to the fertility clinic. So we suffered for a year in silence on our own. Then we told everyone when we landed at the fertility clinic. By a year later, everyone was all up in my business all the time. Oh, how did the test go? Are you pregnant yet? But I was, but I didn't want to tell them. But then 2 days before we were due to have our 7-week ultrasound, I discovered that the pregnancy wasn't viable and that my progesterone levels were something like 70 times, so 70 times the amount of progesterone that a normal pregnant woman would have had because #fertility meds. And so I wouldn't have naturally miscarried for weeks and weeks until I would be like the equivalent of about 14 weeks, because it would take that long for my body to realize, and reestablish itself. So I needed to have a medical miscarriage, which sucked as well. And I'd been keeping it together up until this point and pushing through. And I was a Rotary exchange student for a year in Japan when I graduated high school. So I literally got dumped in a country, not really knowing the language, not knowing anyone. And they teach you strategies to manage things like homesickness and things like that. One of the strategies they teach is keep busy. I'd been doing that. I'd been pushing through. And then I realized that actually in doing all of this, in trying to have a brave face, I was making everything worse and I wasn't coping on my journey at all, and I crashed. Like, sometimes you just need to hit rock bottom. That was my rock bottom moment.
Yeah.
And then I would walk around work. I had to go straight back to work, and I was walking around work what felt like a zombie. Like, I just had tears in my eyes. I didn't want to talk or engage with anyone. I couldn't muster a smile. I was like, what the F am I doing here? Like, what is the whole purpose to anything? Like, really low times. And we ended up taking this last minute trip to a place called Lombok in Indonesia. So it's near Bali, but it's not Bali. And I had, because of, this hormone mess that I was in with all of these drastically high hormones that had now crashed, my hair was falling out in proper chunks. Like, I would have a shower and the whole thing would be completely blocked with a big handful of hair after every shower. So I was in Lombok in this eco retreat that had no hot water, it had no air conditioning. It was an eco retreat in the middle of nowhere, and it was just right next to this little village where actually, though, the people didn't have clean water. and they all bathed in like a little dam thing in the town. They slept on concrete floors, and it was just this moment on this trip that, despite everything that was going on, it was like a reality check that, hang on, I'm caught in this fog and I haven't been managing anything right up until now. Like, I've been doing all of these things, but not actually giving myself any priority in any of this at all. And that trying to push through and trying to be strong was like actually screwing me over a little bit. But actually, there were, my life was still continuing. Why had I put on hold going on a holiday for 2 years now? And I mean, like, not even an overnight trip. We had just put it all on hold because I wanted to bank up my leave. I wanted to save as much money as I could. But then actually, I had drained all of the fun stuff out of my life, like all of it. We
Right.
all do that.
Yeah.
I'm cutting out Starbucks because I'm hashtag no coffee. I'm cutting out this. I'm not going to go out with my friends because they're all having kids and they're all talking about kids, but I'm not finding new friends or anything. I'm just going to sit at home and have actually all of these things that are draining my energy, like injections and blood tests and fertility clinic appointments and the stress of keeping up appearances at work. And so I got to Lombok and I was like, what is going on? And I didn't yet know how to cope with my journey in a healthy way, but it was the start of learning how to cope with my journey in a healthy way. And
Right.
it was just this start of thinking to myself, like, actually, my life is continuing, and I get to choose whether I am going to live it or not. And also, this journey, could go on forever. I could just sit and have miscarriage after miscarriage. I could keep having failed IVF cycles, and what am I going to do here? Like, it was this crossroads, and I have a lot to be grateful for in my life. So it was the start. It was like the first step towards, I guess you could say, almost like a recovery from the emotional toll that infertility had taken. And the next couple of months were this real healing journey for me, and that was a lot of clarity. I gained a lot of clarity about and a bird's eye view of my life and what was going on. And I remember standing outside an Indian restaurant with a friend who was asking me how my next cycle had been. So it had been a couple of months. I'd recovered physically from my miscarriage. I'd done a lot of work on coping with my anxiety, coping with my emotions, processing my emotions. And I put my hand to my stomach and I said, you know what? I just know that it's going to pan out. And if it doesn't pan out, I'm going to be okay. And I was rubbing my tummy and I just felt so confident. And everyone who's listening is going to think that I felt pregnant at this cycle, and I didn't. But I did really feel okay. And I did really feel that it was all going to work out for me. And it was just that moment of, hang on, it didn't work out, and I haven't had this huge crash down for the first time ever. So it wasn't like, I magically then conceived and everything was well because I had this like mindset shift. It wasn't that woo-woo. It was actually, I learned healthy ways to cope with my emotions and manage my anxiety and take myself out of this constant flood of cortisol. And no, my cycle didn't just magically work, but actually I felt like I could cope with everything so much better. And I know that it did affect my fertility, that the next cycle, which was a fresh retrieval, had yielded such better results, like much higher quality eggs and embryos. And that's how we conceived Chloe. Chloe is about to turn 5, and from the same retrieval, we conceived little Olivia, who is about to turn 3.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I got the chills. You know what moved me when you were talking about touching your belly?
Yeah.
I felt, and it wasn't necessarily thinking that you had a child from that point, but I felt in my mind as you were saying it, I had a visual just of you stopping to give yourself love.
Yes.
You know, it's almost like you gave your abdomen love.
And do you know, like people often talk about when you fall pregnant, they don't want people to rub your tummy. I was like, come and rub my tummy because I need all the good luck I can get. And I really had this shift
Yeah.
to, like, when a woman was pregnant, it was almost like I wanted to touch her because I was like, whatever she's having is working, so I'll have what you're having, rather than what had been before. I was like trying to run a mile from women who were pregnant.
Yeah.
That it was like everything was this huge shift in me. And it's, I mean, when we look at our emotions and our mental health and things like that, it's not like a once and done thing. It's this ongoing, I guess, journey
Right.
for me in terms of personal development. I've learned so much since then as well, but you can, like, in that short 2 to 3 month period, things turned around for me so much, and it can really, things, your mindset, your emotional health can change that quickly.
It's amazing. So you went away, you guys decided, okay, like enough, let's go somewhere, and you shifted, you changed your environment, which I think is huge too, when you're going through something for so long, to actually be in a different environment. But when you started seeing how people lived, and it just kind of, something clicked at that point. That was obviously something that took a while, but something just kind of clicked in your mind and said, okay, wait a second.
Yes, it just,
You know, it kind of, yeah.
I crashed down to earth. Like I mean, and even just the act of at the last minute deciding that actually my mental health matters, and actually screw what else is going on. I need to go on a holiday. That act of deciding that I was a priority. And the place that we went to, yes, it was an eco retreat, but it also had all meals included. It also had a pool. It also had a daily massage. And I was never the type, people would say to me, I'm going to go for a massage. And I'd be like, oh, airy fairy. Like, if I want someone to do that, I want someone to like jam their elbows into me and, like have this remedial massage. Whereas now I'm like, yeah, baby, take me to the relaxing place. Like, things just changed so much for me that
So it sounds like almost like you were more surrendered. It's just like you just let go at that point.
100%. And I decided that, you know what, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And something needed to change for me drastically.
Yeah. That's pretty amazing. And I'm sure it's inspiring to so many people listening, which is why I think that you literally birthed a movement. And it's really, there's nothing better than learning from somebody who's actually walked the path.
Absolutely.
And gone through it and can say, yes, I've gone through this. And it also, I'm sure, inspires so many people to hear that you actually got through it and you're okay. You're okay today. And it's not so much just because you have kids. That's beautiful, but you're okay because you chose to invest in your mental health, to invest in your spirit.
Yep. And to just come back to reality and realize almost like what was going on around me. Like, I still had a life. I would always have a life, and that this was a temporary struggle in my life. And it was okay to be a really hard thing. I didn't need to be strong all the time. It was okay for it to be a really hard thing, but also that I wouldn't be 60 years old and still every month crying on the bathroom floor, breaking down when other people were pregnant, things like that, knowing that this was just it was a temporary discomfort / trauma that I needed to work through, and that it was okay for it to be really hard, but that I could also be really happy and have a fulfilled life at the same time. And I think sometimes we always think it's got to be either one or the other. Like, it's got to be this really, really hard thing and nothing awesome can happen in between. But actually, you can have a really awesome life and not have a really boring life at the same time as infertility. Like, it can be awesome and really hard at the same time.
Such is life. It's really amazing, and I think that that's what it is that it's not black and white. It's everything, and everything in between.
That's exactly right. Like, and it's always one. Just because you had one hard thing doesn't mean you're not going to have another hard thing. It doesn't mean that hard things aren't going to stack up against each other. I was talking with one of my clients just the other day who has gone through a really hard thing, and she had one hard thing happen to her and then another hard thing. And I said, do you know what? That's just sometimes how it goes. And when I had Olivia, so not only had I gone through, like all of the journey that I had gone through, but I developed a condition called major placenta previa, which meant that I could, I had a 90% chance of hemorrhaging before she was born, which did happen. And I did get rushed to the hospital. And so even with all of it, and so I had to, for the last few weeks, like 8 weeks before I was due with her, I had to stay within 10 minutes of the hospital in case I had this bleed, because you can bleed out really quickly from your uterus. It's a very vascular area. And, but not only that, that then her birth went a little bit pear-shaped and I ended up having a hysterectomy. But then not only that, but she ended up in special care for 5 nights. But then not only that, but we ended up separated for 48 hours. And this was actually the true test of how far I'd come, because, yes, it was really, really hard, but I also coped and I survived. So on our fertility journey, it does, it's not even just once you fall pregnant, it will all be over. There might be more challenges that come your way. If even whatever happens in your life, sometimes, one challenge is replaced by another, or challenges just keep stacking up against each other. And that's right. That's how life is. So it's so important for us to start, rather than saying, I'm just going to push through this one thing, understanding that it's really important for us to start prioritizing ourselves and our mental health, because this it's very likely that this isn't going to be the one and only really traumatic thing that we ever go through in our lives.
Absolutely. And really, doesn't it show you the strength that you didn't even know you had?
I know, right? And, you will survive this. You may not want to survive this. You may wish that it never happened to you, and that's perfectly normal. But you will actually survive. You will put one foot in front of the other and get through every day until it passes. It's just the choice is yours about how well or you wish to do that.
Right. And it sounds like, that pivotal point, really what changed was your choice.
Yes.
When you were away, you just decided. You made that choice and you decided. And was it smooth sailing? No, but you decided. And once you made that decision, it made moving forward easier, it sounds like.
Absolutely. And I think sometimes I see on social media and things like that, people saying, I choose to be happy. And I don't think it's about choosing to be happy, but I think it can be about choosing what's important for us and how much value and time we put into things that matter. And you matter. Like, you are really important. You matter. Your health and well-being, your happiness, those things matter. So how can you navigate more towards things that will give you energy and make you feel happier in your life?
You know what's interesting? I meditate every morning. That's my lifeline. I have to in order to, and that's what keeps me surviving. And it's not surviving. I thank God I feel blessed and happy, and I can't complain at all. But it just helps me manage everything. And every morning I meditate, and sometimes I'll get inspired thought. And I think that sometimes when you give yourself that time to listen, and sometimes it's even going on a break, going away, you get inspired thought. And one of them, and I don't remember exactly how it came to me, but it's almost very much aligned to what you're saying. It was the fact that, how we save up money so that we can get something, and we kind of work to get to an end point. I was thinking, it's funny because a lot of people do that with joy. Like, we put joy on hold. Like, until I get this, then I can allow myself to feel that joy.
Yes.
We put it on hold as if it's something that is expensive and unaffordable, but it's something that we actually have a choice about every single second of the day.
Yes. And I feel like I'm pretty sure they've done studies on this exact same kind of thing at Harvard. And they talk about, sometimes we get paralyzed by the choices that we have. And so there's this whole concept of us always deciding that when we set goals, we set goals and we say, I'm going to reserve my happiness, or I'm only going to be happy when this happens. But the problem with
Mm-hmm.
that is that when we reach a goal, as humans, we then set another goal. So if we're
Mm-hmm.
never stopping to appreciate the milestones along the way, celebrate the small victories that we have, and be grateful for what we have around us, then we're going to
Mm-hmm.
end up in this never-ending cycle of chasing joy rather than finding joy in what already exists.
Yeah, it's really amazing. It's like so simple, right?
Yes,
Just such a simple thing.
yes,
And
and
yet it seems so complicated. It's not.
yeah, I know. And sometimes,
Mhm.
sometimes executing it is not as
Mhm.
easy, but it's about taking the action to try and get
Yeah.
to the goal and celebrating the actions that you're taking rather than celebrating the goals in and of themselves.
And what's amazing about your story, so you really called yourself a type A personality before. You like knew what you wanted to do, you had everything kind of organized, and at that point you were almost broken open. It sounds like it transformed you. You no longer were holding on to anything. You were almost in a state of allowing the
Yes.
process to unfold. And then from that point you ended up going home. And how did everything unfold once you went back into your normal routine?
It was really different for me. So, it was all a process of taking action. So, for example, one of the things that I started when I got back, I was really taken aback. And sometimes it's there's simple little mindset shifts that make all the difference. But it's also about the tiny actions that we take. One of the things that I did that I highly recommend anyone does is to start a gratitude journal. And
I love that. Yes. Yes.
it's
It's
like
magic.
it was the one action that I took that started really changing the way I was looking at the world. And it's one thing I just recommend that everybody does, because what will happen, it's really hard, first of all, if you close your eyes and think about something that you're so, so, so grateful for, it's really hard at the same time to feel anger, sadness, resentment, frustration. It's really hard to feel that at the same time as you're feeling like this moment of gratitude. And all we need is a moment,
Right.
and then we just pair all of these little moments together, and we try to make these moments of gratitude more and more frequent. And what I did was I wrote down 3 things I was grateful for every day. And I tried to not think of just the same things, like not, I'm grateful for my house, I'm grateful for my husband, I'm grateful I live in Australia.
Mhm.
I try to think of
Right.
little things. I'm grateful for the bird that I heard tweeting as I walked out the house today. I am grateful that, I don't know, the milk wasn't off this morning. Just like simple things. But then
Mhm.
what happens
Yeah.
is, you've committed yourself to finding 3 things every day. So every day, your brain's just like, what can I be grateful for? What can I be grateful for? What can I
Mhm.
find?
That's
And
right. Yeah.
that's how you get these moments of gratitude that start to become more common than the moments of despair and hopelessness and things like that. And, there was a range of actions that I took, tiny little actions, tiny little mindset shifts. There's not one magic bullet, there's not one thing that anyone can do to help you change, but you can be empowered to make little changes every day that will help you process your emotions, reframe the way that you're looking at the world, and help your fertility journey as well. And that was what I started to do, just tiny little things, all the time, affirmations, all sorts of things that then made this big difference in my life.
Yeah, it really does. It's those little things. It's like the book Atomic Habits. I love it because I don't know. Have you ever heard of it?
I have heard of it. The cover is in my mind at the moment.
Yeah, it's great because he says those little things are what really makes huge. It's like an atomic bomb is this.
Yes.
It's nothing, like practically nothing that makes this huge explosion.
Mm.
And so the same thing happens with small little actions that we can make huge changes, even more so than making too big of a change, because too big of a change isn't realistic.
Yeah, it's so right. And I mean, if you think, you're so right when you talk about, me learning to surrender. And I'll give you two little examples of, I guess, kind of what the change in me was. And if you like picture your hands with two clenched fists, this was me trying to hold on, trying to control everything, trying with a lot of anger and resentment in me that I actually didn't realize that I had, trying to just hold on and control the journey. And the reality is that we can control the actions we take. We can't control the outcome. And that was a huge moment for me. And then to just imagine if you've got two hands actually open, ready to receive, was sort of the change that I just thought, okay, actually, I'm just going to be open to whatever happens and accept that I can't control the outcome and I need to be okay with that. And another example is to imagine yourself like rafting or kayaking against the tide. It's really, it's so hard to kayak against the tide. You put in so much energy and you get frustrated and you get really tired when you're trying to do that. You're going down a river. But then if you decide to just turn around and flow with the stream, it just gives you more energy to be able to paddle through what you need to paddle through when you need to paddle through it. And that was
And you can allow that to move you where you need to go. It kind of utilize that energy flow.
Exactly. And so that's what I was doing before, is I was, putting all this energy into all of these things that were just leaving me so heartbroken, and just trying to go against the tide and trying to go against the tide. And I was drained. I was so drained. And then following that, I was like, okay, I'm just going to have to flow with this whatever way this is going to flow with. And it helped fill my tank, and it helped give me the energy, the clarity to go where I needed to go.
That's really beautiful. It's interesting when you were saying that you were opening your hands, because right after you finally allowed yourself to open the hands, you started the gratitude journal. It kind of moved you to doing things. And interestingly enough, it sounds almost like you aligned with yourself and your intuition began leading you to where you needed to go.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah. It was just a cool process. And it wasn't like I had one big epiphany. I just kept like going with the flow of what was going on and taking steps towards what felt good for me. Like, actually, hang on, I'm important. I matter. What feels good to me? This feels really good to me. This is going to make me feel a bit happier. That's what I'm going to do right now. So, no big epiphanies, no big actions or anything like that. Just like what you were talking about, these tiny little atomic habits and mindset shifts that then just, made everything a lot easier. And I feel like I've talked a lot about, I guess, like woo-woo and mindset and things like that, but there's a lot of science that comes back to how taking our body out of chronic stress and chronic floods of cortisol can improve our fertility, and how being in a state of chronic stress can affect our fertility as well. So, I don't think it's an accident that some of the changes that I made improved my egg quality, improved my results, and, ultimately helped me fall pregnant.
Yeah. It's such an inspiring story. I just love it. I really do. I got the chills a couple of times and everything. So then at what point did you decide to create the Fertility Warriors podcast and share your journey?
So a bit of a funny story is that when I was 10 years old, I decided, we have this actress in Australia called Melissa George, who used to appear on this really famous show called Home and Away. When I was 10 years old, determined that I was going to be the next Melissa George. I once ran away from home because mum and dad would not move to another state so that I could attend the same talent agency as her. I was devastated. But generally, I've just been quite an open book and an extroverted person. And I found that once we told our friends, it was like this whole weight had come off my shoulders. So I started this. Hardly anyone actually knows about this, but I just wanted to get some things off my chest, and I found it therapeutic to write a few things. So I wrote under this like blogspot or WordPress or something called Mama Pink. And I only wrote like 3 articles. At the same time, I had started this food blog as well. One day I was like, you know what? I'm actually just going to chuck all of those articles that I wrote on this Mama Pink onto my food blog. I'm going to just come out and announce it. And then that was kind of it. I found it therapeutic to write about my story. And then once I got over this whole feeling of secrecy and thinking I want to let people know, and once I let everybody know, it was actually quite crazy. I had so many people reach out to me by direct message on Messenger saying, oh my God, I'm struggling with this too. It was like this whole secret society. None of my friends were talking to each other about, all of this stuff. And then I felt quite, I guess, called to wave the flag of, do you know what? I don't mind everyone knowing my business because, I'm that kind of personality. So here I am. I'm just going to share a few bits of my story. And I reserved some bits just for ourselves, especially when I had the miscarriage. But just one thing led to another. And then I started a podcast that was called the Fertility Warriors. And I only started the podcast because I had a friend who her best friend was doing a podcast, and she was like, you should launch a podcast. I was like, challenge accepted.
I love that. That's great.
It was just at the start, like not that many people were doing podcasts, especially in Australia. No one was really listening to podcasts, but I literally was just like, challenge accepted. I'll do this. And then one thing has left to another. It's just like, the concept of being on the boat and flowing with the stream, that I've just kind of flowed from one thing to the next and gone with, I guess, my intuition and what has felt good to me at the time. And yeah, that's where I am.
That's great. It actually, some of the things that you were talking about remind me of Buddhist. It's really a lot of Buddhist philosophy is that suffering comes from resisting. It's a push and pull. We want to pull what we really want into our life, and then we want to push any kind of suffering. And then you find yourself in the push and pull. You're not really getting what you want.
It is. It's so true. And it comes back as well. A lot of people in so many cultures, we talk about in traditional Chinese medicine, they'll talk about the yin and the yang. We talk a lot now in Western society about feminine and masculine energy. And it's this whole concept of having a balance between the push and the pull, and surrendering versus taking action and things like that. And I was just so, I guess, out of balance with everything that I was doing. And, it's an ongoing process. I'm always pulling myself back to, trying to pull myself back to equilibrium. But
I think we all are, even the most balanced of us. But I think that in some ways it's so poetic and beautiful that, first of all, I'm sure it's very healing for you to be able to heal so many other people through your own journey, where it almost gives the suffering more of a purpose, even though you don't want to go through that suffering. But because you went through this, you're able to help so many women out there.
I really hope so. And I guess in sharing my story initially, that was always what I had hoped, is that, do you know what? Like, I'm willing to wear the flag. I'm willing to be the person that puts my hand up and says,
I can guarantee you're doing it. It's not a hope. You are really helping so many women.
And I think it's really needed. The stress of infertility, there's lots more studies coming out, or maybe I'm just seeing more, but the stress of infertility has been shown to be comparable to that of a cancer diagnosis. It's not a little thing. It's not a small stress. And what's more though is that even lifestyle changes, nobody other than my naturopath, nobody really talked about any of that other stuff. And I think there's a big, a lot that can be said for a holistic piece that focuses, has a balance of natural versus conventional, of physical wellness versus mental wellness. And I think that the industry is very imbalanced at the moment, and we've become very, detached from
Mm-hmm.
all of the different elements that can impact success. And, it breaks my heart. I
Yeah.
don't want anyone to go through what I went through. And if I can help fast track that, but also help people feel, because infertility for me felt like I set off on, like a 5 mile jog and then ended up running a marathon with no finish line.
Mm-hmm.
And
And no
I always
guidance.
felt,
Yeah.
and no, yeah, with roadblocks, with all of that stuff. And then I felt initially like pregnancy was the finish line. And what I discovered, and what so many of my other fertility warriors discover, is it's not. It's like, as I was saying before, it's like a whole new set of challenges, and it's a whole new marathon.
Mm-hmm.
Parenting is a whole new marathon that,
Right.
I'm so glad
Yeah.
that I was able to learn these skills to be able to get through this really hard thing before I had children,
Mm-hmm.
and that I hope that I can pass on those skills to help people, cope in a healthy way with the next chapters as well.
Yeah. It's really, really beautiful. And so, this was the question that came to my mind before. What would your today self say to your old self when you first started the journey?
Um, Wake up, probably. Um, I was just, it's really when literally our brains, when we're in our emotional brain and in this constant state of, I guess, like trauma, our rational brain actually switches off. So it's really hard to be in both your emotional brain and your rational brain at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
It's like impossible. But I would have like shaken myself and said, wake up. Like, what was I doing? Because I had just, it's such a simple equation that there are things in your life that bring you joy. Like, you would know if you go out to, for me, if I go out to dinner with friends and I have a great chat and a great dinner, I come home and that feeling where you just feel so energized and you're like,
Yeah.
oh, that was so great. There are things in your life that bring you joy. Sometimes they're really simple things. Like maybe it's swimming in the beach. Maybe it's just having a shower. But there's simple things in our life that bring us joy and happiness in our lives. And I had kind of sucked all of that out. I had just paused everything. I was completely, not aware of what was going. It was almost like I was not aware of what was going on in my journey, because I was head down, bum up, working long hours, but for what? I don't know. Working
Mm-hmm.
really long hours and pushing through for success and what I thought would be, what would lead to my eventual happiness. But actually, it was this whole concept of we just keep striving for happiness instead of trying to find some happiness in what we have right now. And I paused everything. And so I would be telling myself to wake up and take my foot off the brakes of my life and
Mm-hmm.
start trying to just enjoy some of the simple things in life. And it didn't mean, like going and trying to change the world. It just would mean like taking some moments to, I don't know, even rest or do things that light me up.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And although you had given actually really good tips, I was going to ask you if there's any tips or words of wisdom. I love the gratitude journal. I think that that's wonderful. And I love the fact that you said it could be anything. And it should be different things, every day it does train your mind to start looking. Is there anything else that you'd like to
Um,
share?
yes. I'm going to share with you a story that I think everyone will be like, whoa. There was this Chinese farmer, okay? And one day, one of his horses went missing. His neighbor came over the fence and said, oh, your horse went missing. That's terrible. And he said, good or bad, hard to say. The
Mm.
next thing that happened, have you heard this story?
Yes, I love it.
Uh, I love this story. The next thing that happened was his horse came back and brought with it a whole bunch of wild horses. And the nosy neighbor came over the fence and said, this is fantastic. This is awesome. And the man said, good or bad, hard to say. One day his son was in the paddock and one of these wild horses kicked him and broke his leg. nosy neighbor says, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." And the man says, "Good or bad, hard to say." The next day, the army came around to conscript people for the army, and his son was spared conscription because he had broken his leg. And I think it just goes to say that not only, like, as much as we want to control the future of everything, we just don't know what is coming up on our path. And that, yes, sometimes things feel really hard in a given moment, but we just can't foresee the future. We can't control the future. So we just need to move through every moment as it is, which is every moment. Like, life is just one big moment of next steps. So we just need to try and bring ourselves back to what's going on in any moment, and appreciate what we have in any moment as well, because we never know what's around the corner.
Oh, I love that. That is beautiful. That is just so inspiring. And I love that story. I've heard Eckhart Tolle say that. And I love Eckhart Tolle. He's like, I consider him one of my teachers. And he's just, it's 100%. And we as humans love to judge. We love to judge every moment. And what does this mean? And we bring meaning and stories into everything that happens to us.
Yes.
But good or bad, hard to say.
I mean, 10 years ago, 10 years ago, I got married. Like, I would never have thought at the time I got married that I'd have had a hysterectomy. Like, I've got no uterus anymore. I would have never pictured that happening, or that I have, like, thousands of people who tune into me every week on a podcast. Didn't exist then, but, like, let's say the radio. I would have never thought that any of this would have happened. So we have no idea what our life has in store for us. All we can do is take each day as it comes.
Absolutely. And what I love about your story is that it's something that was beyond traumatic. It was even more traumatic than a lot of the fertility stories I hear, because of all the health issues you had to deal with and the loss. Yeah. And so the fact that you took something like that and turned it into something, a work of love and inspiration and healing for so many people. And I know, because I speak to a lot of people, you probably don't think of it like that. You just do it. It's just something you do. But I'm here to reflect to you that it's pretty amazing, and it is really inspiring. And I think it's how to make life poetic is when you take something like that and really use that, I guess, fertilizer, the crap that has happened to grow gorgeous, beautiful flowers with a beautiful fragrant scent that impact your neighbors and the people around you.
That's beautiful. You've made my day. Thank you.
Yeah, it is pretty. And it's so nice to talk to you. I've spoken to you, through emails. So I never actually got to speak to you. And it's really nice to hear your voice. And I've heard your voice on the podcast, but it's really nice to actually have a conversation. So
it is always so nice to connect.
Oh, it is, right? It's a whole different story. Then you really get to know the person. Mm-hmm. And I'm very happy that we finally got to do this. And if people would like to find you, how can people find you?
So it's very easy. They can find me at robynbirkin.com. So ROBYN, and Birkin is BIRKIN. So we've obviously got the Fertility Warriors, and I'm sure, we've got very similar focuses. So I'm sure that people are across both of them already at the same time. But you can also check me out on Instagram, same handle, Robyn Birkin, and I'm pretty active there as well.
And I'll have all of that information in the show notes. So if anybody wants to go back and look and get the exact spelling, it'll be there. So thank you so much, Robyn. This is really fascinating, interesting. I knew about your journey, but not quite to the extent and the detail that I learned today. And I just find it so fascinating and inspiring. So thank you so much for sharing your message.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real honor chatting with your audience and sending lots of baby dust to everyone out there.
Awesome. So that concludes today's episode. You can find all the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to leave a review. Reviews are everything to podcasters. You can find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com. And please be on the lookout for my online course and program. This course has emerged from everything that I've been using for the fertility program I now offer at my office. I wanted to consolidate all of my suggestions and coaching and put it into a form that anyone can purchase and use. It was important for me to encompass key fertility health factors as well as guide you in implementing changes in your routine that are shown to boost fertility while being realistic and user-friendly. I will be offering this course with and without coaching. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com, where you can find the subscription form. I thank you so much for listening in and hope you have a beautiful day.